All right, this evening we'll be in Genesis chapter 30 and following, and I'd like to sort of survey over some of these chapters. There's a lot of detail in these, chapter 30, 31, 32, and it's an ongoing story about Jacob, and this is where we're at in our study of the patriarchs. And the last time he was with Jacob is when he took off after deceiving his brother Esau and Isaac in his little scheme to get the birthright, to get the blessing and all that kind of stuff. And he had to head off to see his uncle Laban. And when he got to see his uncle Laban, he got there, and that's when he married the wrong woman. That's always a big problem, you know, when you marry the wrong woman. And so then he had to marry the right woman. Then he had to marry. Then it was just, you know, and what we see Jacob's life is God had his hand in this man for a purpose to bring this nation of Israel in, but Jacob was far from a perfect person, and Jacob many times would have to find himself the hard way that you reap what you sow. And when we get into, I'm just going to sort of give an overview of what happened in chapter 30. Basically, the writer here gives us some of the family history here. When you see Jacob, he actually married Leah, and by mistake, and then he married Rachel by choice, and then unfortunately, because of the culture of his day and all this, they would also not only wives, they'd have handmaids, and many times these guys would have children by their handmaids or these maids in the thing. You know, does that stuff really good? No, they had a lot of problems. You know, and you got to think about the tension that was in the home. Rachel and Leah, were they just good old buddies? No, they weren't good old buddies. It wasn't like one big happy family. It would make for reality TV today if you had Jacob and his two wives and his two handmaids. It would probably be the top #1 series on television for mixed up homes, you know, and there would be wars and feuding and all kinds of stuff going on. But let me just list you a little bit. They had all these children now enlisted, and I'll just read some, like from Leah. There was the children of Reuben and Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and one daughter named Dinah. Okay, this was the children that came from Leah. And then there was Bela, which is one of the handmaids, and from Bela he had Dan and Naphtali. And then from Zilpah, which was Leah's handmaid, he had a young son named Gad and Asher. And then from Rachel, now remember Rachel there, she did not have children for a number of years, and she was unable. And God finally granted this opportunity to have children, and she had Joseph and Benjamin. And now this was, they're very important, these last two, and Joseph was the one who becomes really the centerpiece of the Bible later on in the book of Genesis. So we have there's these sons of Israel here, the 12 sons, and of Jacob, whose name's changed to Israel, and they became what they called the tribes of Israel. And so they get very important names of the Bible. Later on, when they would go back into the land after they would leave Israel and go back into the land of Israel, the land was all divided up, and the territories was named after these sons. And except you won't find the tribe of Joseph, because Joseph was blessed doubly, and he had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and two of the tribes of Israel were Manasseh and Ephraim, and there's no tribe of Levi, because Levi was the priestly tribe, and they were just scattered among all the tribes. But these are the important names of the Bible as far as that goes, and they were among many of the years there. Because here's Jacob. You know, sometimes we don't realize time passes here. From the time Jacob leaves his home there, when he was scared that Esau was going to kill him, till we get to where we're at now, where we're going to get ready to see Jacob head back, 20 years has passed. Okay? So over the 20-year period, he had these two wives, two handmaids, and at least 13 kids. Okay? So a lot went on there. And so we see all these things going on. I'm just going to come down here a little bit further in chapter 30. After all these things about the sons, it says, and it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go into mine own place and to mine country. And so basically he began to make plans to leave. and go back into where his father's land was. And he said, I just need to take my wives and all my possessions. And basically he said, I would like to be able to take for my wages some of the flock. And so basically for the flocks he said, let me just have the old speckled ones, and the ones with the rings on them and all the stripes on them, and the black sheep. And these were normally ones that were not the prime ones, because I'll take those. And one of the things we find in this story, Laban realized that since Jacob came to live with him, there'd been amazing advancements in his herd. And he understood that for some reason he didn't know, and he wasn't a man who didn't worship the one God like Jacob would have worshipped, because he had these other idols in his house and everything. But he just understood there was some reason that Jacob was in his life, and his land became blessed. And so God's blessing was on this man, even though he wasn't always doing what was right. Now, why was it? Because God had a plan for Jacob to bring this nation into existence. See, God was going to bring Israel into existence no matter what. Okay, that was the plan. And if God was just waiting for somebody faithful and godly generations, the nation of Israel might have never got into existence. See, the nation of Israel in God's plan had to come. And sometimes you see a lot of things in the scriptures where the people of Israel wasn't very godly, but yet God seemed to bless them. And it's not because he approved it of their actions, but he did approve that they were going to be the ones that bring the nation into existence. And right now we're seeing the foundation of this in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then his sons. And his sons were not always right either. They sometimes did some bad things too. But we see Jacob here being blessed by God, and the flocks were growing. And so he took this group of outcast flock, and it is actually start growing. And in this chapter, you find even where he had this little scheme of somehow thinking if you take this certain type of tree and make into the water, it would cause more to be speckled and all this kind of stuff. And as I read commentaries on that, no one really has a great understanding of. There's no proof of anything just works, other than they just realized they thought it worked. Okay, and anyway, whatever happened, there just seemed to be more speckled sheep and more things, and all the speckled ones went to Jacob, and so it seems like God's hand was on Jacob, and his herd was growing and growing, and so when he was going to leave, he was going to have a number of animals in his flock, and so we go to the next chapter. We'll pick up this story here in chapter 31. And let me pick it up. And the Lord said unto Jacob, let me go down to verse 3. And the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of thy fathers, and do thy kindred, and I will be with thee. Okay, so Jacob first had a desire, now God was giving his blessing. Okay, Jacob, you're going to go back to your land. Okay, remember with Israel, with the nation, with all the people, the patriarchs, the most important thing was the land. Okay, it was always the land. You go back to the land. God took Abraham out of his land to this land. God brought forth the son Isaac to be in that land. Now Jacob was going to go back to the land. Later, Joseph saved the people of Israel over in Egypt, but eventually they had to go back to the land. And so he's going to go back. And Jacob, now Laban wasn't necessarily liking him to leave, because during this 20 years, Jacob had been a good tender, a good shepherd of things, the blessings of God. He'd led sort of this farm, this ranch, whatever you want to call it in today's world, and it's really grown and grown, and he wasn't really pleased with him leaving, but he was going to leave, and he was going to leave in a way that really didn't make him very much of in the eyes of Laban, a very good thing, because he just decided, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to tell him, because he was afraid that Laban was going to change his mind and hold back land or livestock, and maybe not let him leave with his wives. And so what happens in our story here in chapter 30, one day Jacob just said, okay, family, remember, they left, they didn't live next door, the people was all spread out through this land. He said, we're going to leave. So he grabbed his wives, his handmaids, his sons, hundreds of animals, and they take off toward Israel. And so he takes off toward Israel, and he's actually gone for like 3 days before Jacob realizes that, hey, Jacob and my daughters are gone. My grandchildren are gone. Now, Laban become very angry. Okay? Sometimes Jacob sort of has this thing about making people mad, doesn't he? Did you ever see? Here he was. He left Esau because they were mad at him and running to Laban. So after 20 years, Laban's mad at him, and he runs from Laban, and he's going to go back to Esau. So it sort of goes around and around here with this guy. So he has a way to make people get irritated, I think. But anyway, he was going to be on the run again, and he takes this group here away from Laban's land and heading back toward his land. What happened, and you can read all this, there's a lot of verses. I'm not going to try to read all these verses, but I'm just trying to summarize to you. He decided that it didn't make him happy that he wasn't told. And then he found out, and someone took his little gods out of his tent. See, Laban was a polytheistic kind of guy. Now, what he didn't know is and it was in the story, Rachel took these things. Now, she didn't tell Jacob that she took them. She just took them and put them in the saddle over the camel. And so Laban, not only he's mad that Jacob, his son-in-law, left with his wives, left with his grandchildren, left with his livestock. He looks, someone stole my gods. Oh, that really made him up. So here he gets on his camels, he gets on his horses, he takes his men, and he's off, and he runs them down, and he catches up with them. And they sort of have it out in this chapter, at first, and basically, why'd you steal my gods? I didn't steal your gods. And really, he didn't steal his gods. One time he was truthful. He didn't steal his gods. His wife did, but he didn't. And he didn't know that. So Rachel was sitting on the camel, and she wouldn't get down, and they didn't look in the camel saddlebags, and they couldn't find him, so they said, okay, he must have. So anyway, basically in this chapter, they come to a conclusion, and they build a memorial here saying, like a monument. And basically they agreed. Laban says, you stay, you never come back across this way, and I won't come across this way. It was like a boundary. And he says, okay, we're going to depart here. There's not going to be nothing more said about it. But I don't want you coming back this way, and I won't come back this way. So as we see the story here, we see this is sort of another tense moment in the life of Jacob. This guy here, he has a lot of tense moments, doesn't he? He has a lot of moments where, he finagles a little bit, and then things come home to get him. And he tells a lie, and something comes home to get him. And so these are the things in Jacob's life. And so we're seeing the next chapter here. We're going to go to the next chapter right away here. And because this is a really neat chapter of the Bible, chapter 32. As he's heading on now, he had his meeting now with Laban and his group, and is off down toward Israel. And now here we see an unusual experience. And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And this guy this is something kind of a guy. Not only these other angels of God, multiple angels of God. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's host. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. It means two camps, basically, the word, and basically is God's camp and his camp, and so there was two camps here, and basically while they came to warn a little bit, and basically as sort of his preservation, they stopped them right here and they set up camp, but they found out that Esau had also heard about him coming, and so Esau was coming with 400 men. Okay, now Jacob at this point, he is terrified. Okay, it's been 20 years, and as far as he knows, Esau has stewed and simmered and got angrier, more bitter, filled with more malice for 20 years worth. Now he's not only by himself, he's got a huge army of people, and he's coming to kill him. Okay, that's what his thinking is at this point. And so he, at this point, is a real big turning point in the life of Jacob's life, A lot of things come home here of looking at who he is and what's going on in his life. And as we go down through this chapter, first of all, he realizes, and he was, in verse 27, Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people that was with him into flocks. He basically divided up the people. He divided up his group into two things, so at least if Esau got one, maybe one would get by. And as we go through here, though, there's three things he did. He divided up the group into two groups. But then he does something probably we see more sincere about Jacob than anything he's done in his life, is he had a real sincere prayer before God. And he just opened up to God in this passage here. He cried out to God. And Jacob said in verse 9, O God of my father Abraham, the God of my father Isaac, the Lord which said to me, Return to thy country and to thy kindred, I will deal with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant, for thou hast showed unto thy servant, for with my staff I passed over the Jordan, and now I become two bands or two big companies. Jordan, he basically said, I came over this little stream here 20 years ago with nothing but me and my staff. 20 years later, I'm coming back. I've got hundreds of animals. I've got 13 children. I've got 2 wives and handmaids, and I've got I've got all this servants. It was like 2 big companies of army coming. Some of you are looking at 13. He had 12 sons and 1 daughter. Some of you are looking, where'd you get 13 with 1 daughter? Okay, and plus we don't know, by that time, I don't know if any of these people were married to or whatever, because it's been, some of them are older now, so that's what I said 13. Anyway, he brought all these people, and he said, and this is very open now, this is very honest. You don't see Jacob as honest like this. I said, I'm not worthy. I'm a very unworthy man. I don't deserve your mercies at all. Look at this. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and my mother and with the children. Then he says, God, and thou said, I will surely do the good, make thy seed as the number of sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitude. And he lodged it that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother. And basically, he also sent ahead with some gifts for his brother, with some of his people. So basically, you see what he did. He first of all divided his group up. He spent some time in prayer and sent presents. That's what he did to do this. But he was very fearful. And, Jacob at this point in his life, his growth spiritually is just now beginning, really. He's an older guy, but he's just, he didn't realize if God had called him here, like he did back earlier, we saw, God said, I'll send you back. If God calls you somewhere, he's going to enable you to get through. At this point, he said, God, you called me here, and I'm going to die. And the reason that he just didn't have spiritual maturity yet. Now, we as Christians should be able to face what we go before us with the promises. God says, I've not given you a spirit of fear. God says, I've not given you a spirit of fear. God says, anything in my will, you go do. And you don't have the spirit of fear. You know that I can enable you. He says, God says, I give you the spirit of power, of love, and a sound mind. He said, I've given you those things. So when you fear, it's not from me. But Jacob is very early, although he's an old man, he's very early in his maturity spiritually. And so and now he was a very unusual event. Oh, passed it up there, didn't I? Let me go back. In his life here, a very unusual event takes place. I always call it one of the most unusual events in the Bible, is when God wrestled with Jacob. And it's hard to say, well, why does God do things like this? I don't know. Why does God, the Almighty God, decide to have a wrestling match? So someone suggested to Joshua, the soldier, God came as a soldier. To Abraham, the traveler, he came as a traveler. to Jacob, who was always wrestling with people, he came as a wrestler. So maybe that's it. And Jacob he wrestled with a lot of people in life. And so God put himself in his life here. And Jacob was left alone. And there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. All night long, this event went on. You just understand this. Well, what happened? Well, was it a real man? Was it real God? Was it a dream? What was it? Only we know that when he gets done, he's different in the way his walk. His name has been changed, and he's never the same afterwards. And so God, in this time here, in this very critical time, now remember when Jacob was heading to the north to Laban, God met with him there with this stairway to heaven, this big staircase, this ladder to heaven. And there he saw God's protection and the power of God, his presence there. But now on his way back, here God meets with him again, but meets with him not in a big heavenly scene, but in sort of an earthly type of a thing. And I think in this thing, as I've tried to study this and understand, and is finally understanding that Jacob had to get to the point that he wanted God's blessings on his life more than anything else. That he could not do it on his own. Jacob got through life by being a good schemer. Jacob probably thought ahead of most people a little ways. Jacob would think ahead how he's going to get out of this on his own abilities. He could scheme, he could act, he could be all these kind of things. But here, now he was going to have to learn that he had to be of all of God. So this man wrestled with him, and when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And here's God allowing. Here's this angel of God. Who would think, was it God himself, an angel of God? We don't know all the details, but it was like God's allowing him to sort of keep him pinned on the mat. He said, "Let me go for the day," and he said, "I will not go except thou bless me. I want you to bless me, God. I want this more than anything." And notice he said, "What is thy name? What's your name?" Well, he knew what his name was. My name is Jacob. He had to be honest. 20 years ago, Isaac said, "What's your name?" He said, "My name is Esau." But God said, "I want you to be honest with who you are. Jacob, you're the supplanter. Jacob, you're the trickster. Jacob," he says, "I want to know who your name is. Before God can change you, you got to really deal with who you are. If you've got problems in sin and the flesh, you got to deal with that. You can't expect God to bless you and change your life if you're not willing to admit who you are right now." And a lot of people play a lot of games with who they are, but God says, "Who you are, well, my name is Jacob." And he said, "Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel." And there's different people, they discuss what the name of Israel is. There seems to be no one thing that they come up with. It's one of those names that you ask different commentators, different Hebrew authorities, and they'll say it means this or that. But the bottom line, I think it means mastered by God, or God mastered him. "For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed." And Jacob asked him, he said, "Tell me, I pray thee, thy name." He said, "Therefore it is I that thou dost ask after my name." And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, "For I've seen God face to face, and my life is preserved." So it was like a face-to-face. He just felt that it was a face-to-face meeting with God. He come to reality who he was, and he come to reality who God was. And for the first time in his life, he just finally realized, hey, I can't get through life on who I am. I've got to go in who God's given me the power to be in His power. I'm no longer Jacob the trickster. I'm Israel. I'm no longer a supplanter. I'm under the control of God. And from this point on, I know Jacob is not going to be perfect even from this point on. He's still a man. But this point on, there's a lot of changes in life and different things in his life that's going to go on as he becomes the father of these many sons, as he becomes the leader of the nation of Israel early in its beginning days. He was touched by God. His name was changed. His life changed. Next time we'll look at the meeting with Esau, because it wasn't going to be like he thought it was. And it's one of the amazing meetings because God did a work in everybody's life for the preservation there of the nation. Any questions as we close this point?